Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
Hello and welcome to Legends in Leadership. This is Jason Smith. I'm a family officer with the Carrington Group. My co-hosts on today's podcast are Dr. Blair Ritchie, Executive Director of the International Student Foundation, and Tyler Tallman, also a family officer with the Carrington Group. Good morning, guys.
Hey, good to be here.
As we do each week, we're going to kick things off with our leadership trivia question. We're all fascinated by the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, rise up, meet the challenges of life to make a difference in other people's lives. So Blair, what's our leadership trivia question for today?
All right, thanks, Jason. Got a good one here. This is a story of a legend who was raised in the most modest of living conditions by parents who actually lived in a tent when they got married in 1923. His first bicycle was a junkyard salvage project. Of course, he went on to own quite a collection of classic cars. As a child, he worked the orchards and vineyards with migrant farm workers. Great story. After a particularly grueling workday, he asked his mother, "Will I have to do manual labor all of my life?" And his mother put her hands on her son's head, looked him in the eye and said, "You have everything right in here to do anything and be anything you want." And so this legend dedicated his first company to motivating people to their full potential. His company, Success Motivation Institute, became known around the world, and he became the pioneer of the personal development industry. Do you know who this legend in leadership is? I'll be back at the close of the program with the answer.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Phillip Shero to the episode today. Dr. Shero first put his lifelong passion for developing leaders to use by building and launching LivingStone International University in Uganda, an institution dedicated to transforming Africa by creating the next generation of leaders in a challenging environment. Dr. Shero returned to the United States and settled in Fort Worth, Texas, where he has helped companies achieve their goals through the use of diagnostic tools, executive coaching, leadership development, and inspiring belief in and commitment to a compelling vision of transformation. He holds a PhD in organizational leadership from Regent University and a master's degree in theology from Texas Christian University, a fellow Horned Frog. So welcome. Thanks for making time to visit with us today.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
Well, we'd like to start with just getting a little bit of a picture of your upbringing and background and maybe an early story that influenced your interest in leadership.
Yeah, I like to say I'm a hometown boy with big gaps in my memory. I grew up, started out here in Fort Worth, and then lived a couple different places in Texas. Then we moved to Arkansas for junior high and high school, went to college for undergraduate studies in Arkansas, came back to Fort Worth before we moved to Africa. So, so Fort Worth is home. Traveling to all of those different places, I think, gave me a real perspective on different ways of looking at our own culture and different ways of looking at ourselves. You know, living in Uganda, we were the minority. And so getting that perspective of yourself, I think that affects how I think about leadership and how I think about other people.
Sure, having a multicultural view of the world.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us, as a leader yourself, as a student of leadership, helping others. Let's start with what is a good definition of leadership for you?
Yeah, I've got a three-word definition of leadership. John Maxwell gets it done in one. I don't know that I'm not at his level yet, so it takes me 3 words, and I use the acronym ROI, which makes sense to business leaders, and ROI stands for replication, ownership, and influence. If students of Maxwell know that influence is his one-word definition. To be a leader, you've got to have an impact and an influence on other people's lives. But for me, I have to add those other 2 components of ownership, that we own the outcomes of our influence, whether that's good or bad. We take responsibility for it. Leaders are those who will step up and say, yes, I'll be responsible for this. And if it doesn't go well, it's still on me.
Okay.
And replication is, for me, you're not a leader until you've helped someone else step up and be empowered and be able to lead themselves. So leaders are self-replicating.
Okay.
So ROI, replication, ownership, and influence is my definition.
Excellent. So the school in Uganda, I'm curious, did you start that school with that definition? Did the school experience help you come up with that definition?
Yeah, I think the school experience did help me come up with that. If I can speak to what inspired me or gave me the vision for that, we had been over in Uganda for 3 or 4 years, and there was this huge baby boom going through the Ugandan population. It's got the youngest population in the world.
Wow.
50% are under 15 years old. And if you go up to, like 20 or 22 years old, you've got about 70% of the population. So there was this huge wave crashing through their educational system, and it couldn't keep up. So kids didn't have opportunities. And I remember seeing the national newspaper one day, and the headline, 35,000 students have no place to go to university.
Wow. And
where that stat came from is that year, that was 2012. There were 100,000 high school seniors in Uganda who took the college entrance exam. And out of that 100,000, 60,000 of them passed with high enough scores to get into college. But in all the universities in the whole country together, there were only 25,000 seats available. So that meant 35,000 qualified students had literally nowhere to go. And that was just 1 year. So you compound that year after year. And it struck me that a lot of our work was working with adults, and yet the huge need for the country was in the youth, and specifically in equipping leaders for the next generation of the society there in East Africa. So that just inspired me to think we've got to do something about this.
Sure.
How many students were you guys able to serve at the college that you launched?
So when we started off, talk about humble beginnings, we started off with 31 students.
Awesome.
And they started out in 3 degree programs. It was envisioned as a 4-year, fully accredited liberal arts university. And so these students came in. Today, there are over 300 students. They've got about 5 different degree programs now. And the graduates are already spreading out across business and government and education and healthcare and media, every sector you can imagine in East Africa and beyond.
Talk about some of those challenges, because I've got to imagine in a country like that that is underdeveloped, what were some of the challenges that you guys had to, first of all, build the school and then find help, find the professors? So talk a little bit about that journey of getting it launched.
Yeah, so in 2009, was the year that I went really full-time on developing the university. And I told anyone that would listen, I need 3 things to get this school started. I need uninterrupted electricity, I need uninterrupted internet, and I've got to have an executive assistant. I can't get all of this done. I thought if I have those 3 things, I've got the lever. I can move Africa.
Right.
If I had those 3. It's amazing how hard each one of those 3 were to actually get. We would have 2 or 3 different sources of electric power for when the grid went down. Then we were on solar, and then we were on diesel generators. And we had 2 or 3 different ways to get the internet because one of them was always down. Quick story. There was a tanker that was coming into the port in Mombasa, Kenya. And in order to save fuel, instead of reversing their engines to slow down this huge ocean tanker, they decided they'd save fuel by just tossing the anchor out and letting it drag along the bottom.
Oh, gosh.
This is kind of the mentality of husbanding resources. Well, the anchor was dragging the bottom, and it snagged 2 of the 3 undersea internet cables that connect all of East Africa up to Europe.
Oh my gosh.
And ripped them apart.
Oh, no.
So 3 countries were without the internet for months and months while they tried to haul these things up and splice them together. So those are some of the challenges. But one of them connects back to the need for vibrant, relevant training and equipping for these students, and that was the executive assistant role. And I tell leaders today that my secret tip to accelerating CEO or leadership performance is to have a good executive assistant, so that you're doing the things that only you can do as a leader, and you're delegating, and having an excellent assistant helps with that. So I wanted to hire my first assistant for the university. Out of 31 different applicants, all of whom had either a bachelor's degree, or I think 3 of them had associate's degrees. Out of all of the highly qualified candidates on paper, there were only 3 of them who could complete a simple Microsoft Word assignment that took about 15 minutes. And what I learned from that is that while they had gone to school, their university education had failed them, because they had not been given the real world skills that were needed to compete. And so I knew right away with LivingStone, every student that comes out has got to have excellent computer skills.
Right, some baseline for functionality.
And just that one difference between LivingStone and other universities would catapult our graduates to be able to offer something in the companies and organizations they served. So that was kind of a learning experience from those early days, those humble beginnings.
Sure. And working with those students in those early years of their development, I'm curious, do you feel that leaders are more so born, or are they more so made?
You know, I used to believe that leaders were mostly born. You know, what intelligence are you gifted with? You know, how can you solve problems? Are you smart enough? Are you adaptable? I thought those were inborn traits. But working with students in Uganda from all over Africa who came, many of them right out of villages with no running water, with mud huts, literally sleeping under grass roofs, that assumption was really challenged. Because if they had to be born, you think about the circumstances where they were born and the limitations, the obstacles they had. And I began to see that it's a lot more about the choices that each of us make with what we're given. And I'm convinced today that leadership can be taught, leadership can be developed, and that leaders are made. They're partially made through the influence of other people, and they're partially made through the choices that they make with how to handle the life situations they find themselves in.
Yeah. So how was some of that experience translated into working with CEOs? You come back to, I guess the meme is first world problems, right?
Right.
So you come back from Uganda, and now you're helping leaders in fully developed countries. How do you translate some of those experiences to help leaders in American companies?
I think one advantage that I can bring is because I've worked with people from literally the grassroots, you know, from villages in Africa up to the C-suite. It helps me to help leaders identify with everyone in their company, and to recognize that all of these people have a story. They've all overcome things to get where they are, and they all have aspirations and dreams. And you know, when leaders can truly connect with the people that they're leading, I think that gives them a tremendous advantage.
Sure.
So, Phillip, talk a little bit about you're in this leadership role, and you're teaching people about leadership, and whether or not a leader is born or they're made. The reality is that every leader has struggles. So, what are the top 2 or 3 challenges that you see in the business and workplace that leaders are faced with, and how are you helping them to get past those challenges and overcome them?
So I would say that the number one challenge that leaders face is awareness. And I talk about 3 different levels of awareness. First level is self-awareness, knowing yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're good at, what you need help with, understanding your style, your leadership style and your preferences. That's a really important part of awareness. And I find that a lot of leaders recognize how important that is, and they have invested already in themselves to develop that internal self-awareness. But the next level of awareness is a little more difficult, and that's awareness of other people. knowing how you're different from me, how you come at the world, how you see the world, and what you bring to it. Leaders, when they become aware of other people and their strengths and weaknesses, that gives an added leverage to their leadership, because you can't lead every person the same way. People are different, and you need to relate to them the way they are and recognize the value they're bringing. So that's the next challenge. But the third level of awareness I find to be the most difficult for leaders, and that's the awareness of how they are perceived.
Okay.
So, you start with self-awareness, and then you go to other awareness, and then it's how are others perceiving me and what is my impact on them. Mm-hmm. That's really hard for all of us, I think, to grasp, because we look in the mirror and we see ourselves a lot of times in the best light, though we see ourselves the way we intend to be, and recognizing that those intentions don't always get translated the way we think they are. What kind of impact are we actually having on other people? When you come to grips with that, I think it brings a humility.
Sure.
And an awareness that I'm not as much in charge as I think I am, and I really am dependent on this collaborative effort for us to get anything done.
And that creates a pretty high level of peace for these leaders too, when they actually finally become aware of that. They say, man, look, it takes the village, right, to make this happen. And I think that's so interesting, because if your employees perceive you in a way that you're not in touch with, man, what an interesting environment that you're working in, and you're kind of almost running the organization blind, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you collect that? I mean, if you don't get chosen as one of the few undercover bosses, if you don't have that opportunity, how do you get that true, honest, constructive, useful feedback on how you're being perceived?
Well, I think professionally having a coach can really help someone that's not employed by you, who can speak the truth to you. But beyond having somebody that you bring in from the outside, leaders can develop the skill of seeking honest feedback in a way that they're going to get it. A lot of leaders might ask for feedback, but then either not listen, or the vibe they're giving off says, just tell me nice things.
Yeah. 7 or better.
Right,
that's what I want. Just give me a 7 or better.
8s and 9s. Yeah. Yeah. So, but there is a skill that can be learned of communicating the fact that I'm open to listen to whatever you have to say, even if it's not what I wanted to hear. And when leaders can develop that attitude, and they can give off that presence to people, that I'm here to listen, and I genuinely want your feedback, they can begin to cultivate mirrors all around them who will reflect back to them what they're putting out into the world and how they're being perceived. And that gives them the data they need to make adjustments.
Sure.
So they can be more effective.
Do you see that micromanagement is a big piece of this? Because when you look at leadership, you see folks that have worked their whole life. They've worked so hard to get what they have. They've got this dream, they've got this vision, and then they go out and they start executing on it. And then to be able to let go and to really be able to activate a team seems to be a challenge. So then that in turn is really micromanagement. So do you feel like that's kind of a central piece of these issues that you're describing?
I think it is. I think it's really important. And the thing for leaders to realize is who gets to define what micromanagement is. It's not the leader.
Okay.
It's the employee is the one that gets to define what that is. Because as a leader, I might think, well, I'm just giving direction. I'm just making expectations
just
clear.
Step-by-step direction. That's all I'm doing. Yeah.
Right. But it goes back to that, what impact am I having on others? If they feel like they're being micromanaged, then they are. Mm-hmm. And that's where the leader needs to develop that other awareness. What management approach will be the most appropriate for that employee that will get the most out of them? And what impact is my leadership style having on them? And maybe I need to adapt or adjust to them, instead of expecting them to do all the adapting to what I want.
I think that dovetails well into a question I have about how you coach leaders to make tough decisions. And so as an organization grows, the opportunity to make consensus-based decisions starts to dwindle. If you've got 50, 100, 200 employees, you can't get everyone's input on every decision. So when you're helping coach a leader to make a tough decision, knowing that maybe 30, 50, 60% of the folks are going to disagree with that decision, what is the advice and counsel on how to make that decision and communicate it?
Yes. So I think sometimes leaders are afraid that if they ask for input and they get it and they decide something different, that's somehow harmful.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I asked you for your opinion, you gave it, and then I did
the opposite.
I did the opposite. So that means I don't respect you.
Right.
When actually the reality that I hear back from leadership teams and from managers and employees is they want to be consulted whether or not the leader does what they thought was best.
Okay.
And so when leaders are faced with a tough decision, I'd say don't hesitate to ask people for their input. They know that you only are going to make one decision out of all the opinions you're going to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But valuing people enough to ask and truly listen and hear why is that important to you, I think that goes 90% of the way down the road toward building the trust. And then the leader can make the final call according to what they see and all the information that they have. But don't be afraid to ask for that input, even if you don't follow what other people are saying.
And whatever decision that is ultimately made, if you gave them that respect, then they're good with it, right? I mean,
It goes a long
Yeah.
way. Yeah, it really makes people feel valued.
I want to explore just briefly the replicating side of your definition, because I think a lot of leaders by nature are doers and they're good at doing, and so they just do. And moving from a doer to a developer is a hard journey for some of us to take. How do you help leaders in that journey of moving from just being a good doer to a developer of other leaders?
So in leadership, especially if leaders have developed to the point where they've got P&L responsibility, they're looking at budgets, and they're always doing cost-benefit analysis. They're always looking at where is the value. And so I think if leaders will stop and ask, what is more valuable in this moment? Is it more valuable that I do it exactly the way I want it to be done and I get the result I want? Or is it more valuable for me to develop the capacity of this employee so that long term they're generating value after value after value? And when you do that kind of cost-benefit analysis, you realize that there is a cost to developing other people. That cost may be it's not done the way you thought it would be done.
Right.
They're going to make mistakes. They're going to do something different than what you expected. That's the cost of developing others. But the benefit on the other side is you open up the bottleneck. Now you have all of these people contributing their intelligence, their perspectives, their skills, their experience. They're all contributing that toward growing your business or your organization, rather than running everything through you. And you may get a few things done the way you want, but you've just clamped down on your capacity. So it really is about seeing the long-term value perspective.
Is there a leader or public figure that comes to mind that's inspiring you to continue to help others, to continue to develop yourself? Is there someone that comes to mind that's helping you stay inspired?
I like to look at leaders and find something from each one of them that I would like to emulate, that I would like to be like. So some of the leaders that have inspired me are Patrick Lencioni, author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and Andy Stanley, who's leader of a church in Atlanta that's just made such a tremendous impact on thousands of people's lives. Those people have inspired me. But I think some of the leaders that have most inspired me are actually African leaders. There's an amazing man in Kenya named Dennis Okoth, who has talked about humble beginnings. His father actually poisoned him and tied him up and locked him in a mud hut to die.
Wow.
So, rejected by his family, a teenage girl broke in and rescued him out of that environment. And his whole life has been dedicated to educating and training and developing young people in Africa. It's such an inspiration to me, and a man I'd really love to be like.
Sure. Well, the question we like to ask everyone that visits visits with us on the show is, what's a leadership book that you found particularly interesting, useful, inspirational, and what's a nugget that you've pulled out of that book that you've incorporated?
So the book I'm reading right now has really captured my imagination. It's called Immunity to Change, and it's written by Keegan and Leahy, two researchers who have spent the last 25 years researching and working in companies with leadership teams and executives on barriers to change. Mm-hmm. How do we actually change organizations? How do we actually change ourselves? And a lot of the nugget that I have gotten out of that is understanding what a lot of people call resistance to change in a new way. They talk about resistance as, that sounds like a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Change is good. We need to change and adapt, but everyone's resisting. They're digging their heels in. They're dragging their feet. They're the boat anchor. And they say, no. Resistance to change is actually a healthy outcome of our immune system. Our immune system protects us from all the unhealthy changes around us and helps us maintain stability. And so we need to understand that any change we're trying to create is going to interact with our own immune system. So there's kind of this metaphor of a foot on the brake and a foot on the gas at the same time. Mm-hmm. And understanding that dynamic in ourselves and in our organizations, we can realize, where are we actually putting the foot on the brake of the things we say we want, or we really do want, but we're actually acting in counterproductive ways that get in the way of that. So understanding that whole dynamic has been really, really powerful for me. I've already started using that with executives I work with and seeing amazing insights come up about, this is why I couldn't get that resolution to stick, or I couldn't make this important change that in my leadership that I know is important. So that Immunity to Change is the book that I'm working through right now.
Yeah, sounds like great insight. Yeah. Well, on behalf of my co-host, we really appreciate you making the time to visit with us this morning, and I always enjoy our conversations. Every time we get to visit, I take something away of value. So appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our audience too.
Thanks for inviting me to be on today.
Well, we're going to wrap up with our trivia question. Turn it back over to Blair.
Yeah, Jason, for those of us who've been grinding at this leadership thing for a long time, we first learned to set goals and achieve them, learned the importance of positive attitude from a guy whose name is probably all over Baylor University land. We'll recognize Paul J. Meyer's name.
Yeah.
And it was our legend today.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, thanks again for joining us on this episode of Legends in Leadership. And remember this: if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by ISF and Carrington Group. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphan youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. Google International Student Foundation to learn more. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. Google Carrington Group Dallas, Texas to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.